I'm writing this as the Suns are up 18 points on the Clippers, so if you're seeing this, that means the Phoenix Suns have made the NBA Finals. And well, holy crap, I never thought that as a Suns fan I would actually see this happen. So briefly, I want to talk about the series against the Clippers. All I have to say is that Phoenix got lucky. The Phoenix Suns just kinda got lucky in this series, and I just want to say that as a Suns fan, hating Los Angeles basketball teams are in my blood, but I have to give some respect to the Clippers. So Phoenix did not have to play against Kawhi Leonard, and honestly, I thought this current team without Kawhi would be a 4 or 5 game series, but the Clippers were able to extend it out to 6 games, and they looked damn good in some moments. Marcus Morris played really well in these last 2 games, hitting some big shots and some shots that I didn't know he was capable of. Despite missing those free throws at the end of game 3, Paul George has been pretty amazing this series and has looked like a true superstar on both offense and defense. Going into game 6, Reggie Jackson was leading the playoffs in 3-pointers with some 40% from 3-point range. Once again, another guy who raised his game in this series. And the other 2 Clippers I do want to mention are DeMarcus Cousins and Patrick Beverley. Cousins was extremely effective coming off of the bench, at least from an offensive standpoint, and I was pretty surprised and honestly pretty happy to see him playing this well and being this effective on a championship possible team. I think in the future he can still have a pretty solid role, maybe coming off the bench if he can still avoid foul trouble. This year his per 36 stats did put him at 22 points, but also averaging 5.7 fouls per game. And the other guy I want to talk about is Patrick Beverley. Skill-wise, he was someone I was definitely impressed by. He had some big shots from both inside and outside the paint, and of course he was amazing defensively. I think at one point he was holding Devin Booker to about like 30% from the field or something like that. But on the other end, his foul baiting, his taunting, and most notably that shove at the end of game 6 was definitely something to ruin his already low reputation. He played well, but man is he annoying to go up against. I think Tyronn Lue also did a pretty good job coaching against Phoenix, or at least better than I thought he was going to. I think the Clippers had some pretty solid rotations. I think their small ball lineups fared pretty well, especially given how dominant DeAndre Ayton was. I almost wish that DeMarcus Cousins would have had a few more minutes just because of how well he was scoring, but we all know that DeMarcus Cousins isn't really much of anything on defense, especially not against a good mid-range team like the Phoenix Suns. I think the one flaw that I did have against Tyronn Lue is that I'm a little surprised that they didn't run more zone. At the beginning of game 5, where the Clippers ran zone for the entire first quarter, they were up 20-5 on Phoenix at one point. And while this is the NBA and you can't run a zone the entire time, the Clippers surely frustrated Phoenix by running this zone. I'm just surprised to see them go away from it, and at least for a surprise factor, I'm surprised that they wouldn't have busted out more against Phoenix in this game 6. And then talking about Phoenix, they obviously won, but a few of these games were kind of ugly, where I sometimes questioned if they were actually going to win the series. Outside of game 1, Devin Booker definitely played kinda slow, and he wasn't shooting as well as what we usually saw him. He also nearly isn't as efficient as he usually was. This broken nose, or even the mask, definitely slowed him down a bit. Chris Paul also missed out in the first 2 games, but it looked like he was able to gain some rhythm towards the end of the series. And obviously, he was the reason why they won this series, scoring 41 points and 7 3-pointers in game 6. I've never seen Chris Paul do something like that. DeAndre Ayton continued to dominate like normal, and of course, he along with Jay Crowder are the reason why the Suns were even able to make it this far. Overall, I think the role players for Phoenix did do a pretty good job in this series, especially since Booker and Paul were not their usual selves for long stretches of time. So why am I calling the Phoenix Suns lucky? Well, I think they're just lucky because they didn't have to go up against Kawhi Leonard. Paul George, Reggie Jackson, and Marcus Morris all pushed them to 6 games. George was having one of the best playoff series of his career. Jackson was being one of the best shooters of the playoffs, and Marcus Morris was just kind of looking like a star, at least a secondary star in those last 2 games. So what I'm saying is the Clippers played incredibly well, and they showed a ton of fight and a ton of tenacity. If Kawhi Leonard was there, I think we would have just been looking at a different series. But LA, you guys just played really well, earned a lot more respect than I had before the series, and just proved to be a better team than what I thought they were. For long stretches of the series, I definitely don't think that we are looking at top tier Phoenix basketball, and when you're in the conference finals, you have to be your top tier, you have to be your A game the entire time. If you slow down for quarters, halves, or even games at a time, that's how you end up watching the finals instead of playing in them. And I definitely think Phoenix had a few stretches where they just weren't looking like their usual selves. So the fact that they were still able to win this series, that really just shows that they were kind of lucky and that the Clippers were just really missing out on Kawhi. So there are two things that I do want to talk about with the series. The first of all is just injuries. And with injuries, you kind of just play the team you play. Phoenix, they can't control who they go up against, and the Clippers can't control who they go up against. You play the 12 men who are lined up against you on the other side. You beat who you beat. If you're the better team, you're supposed to win, and ultimately, that's what I think we saw with Phoenix. Don't get me wrong, not having Kawhi Leonard in this series is a shame. I think we all love to watch him play, and we all love to see what would have happened if we got to see a fully healthy Clippers and a fully healthy Phoenix Suns. And I've also gone this far without mentioning Serge Ibaka. Ibaka is great at stretching out the floor and is a very solid down low defender, someone who I think definitely would have slowed down DeAndre Ayton more than Marcus Morris since they were starting him at center. Yeah, these injuries suck, but injuries also just kind of do happen, and I think Phoenix got lucky. They also did suffer injuries with Devin Booker and with Chris Paul throughout these playoffs. Paul took a long time to return back to form, but with how he played in these last few games, he's obviously back there. But Phoenix also missed out on Chris Paul for 2 days. Devin Booker just didn't look like himself at all after suffering a broken nose, and then once again got hit in the face a few more times throughout the series. And the other thing I do want to talk about are the referees. They were just straight up awful. I don't know how to say it. It was some of the most inconsistent refereeing that I think I've ever seen on an NBA game. They just completely ruined the flow of games with the replays. I think it was game 3. The last 90 seconds of the game took 33 real-time minutes just because they were stopping every other play, and they just had no consistency with the plays they stopped. On that last play where DeAndre Ayton was able to get the game-saving lob for Phoenix, the referee spent a few minutes looking at a somewhat easy out-of-bounds call. This allowed Phoenix to have an impromptu timeout and allowed Monty Williams to draw up the play that they did. Now, of course, replays are important and we also need them to make sure the game is being called well, but when they're having this much time and we're just breaking up the game like this, that is something that the NBA can't allow. And the other thing is just the inconsistencies. Patrick Beverley in Game 5 had a controversial flagrant foul against Game 5, where even as a Suns fan, I would argue that it wasn't flagrant at all, and he was just going over a screen and ran into Chris Paul. Then on the other side, I think it was Cameron Johnson who just straight up elbowed, I want to say it was Paul George, and taking an elbow to the chin is a pretty textbook flagrant. The referees didn't even look at that one. So I'm not really sure who is out here making these decisions, but there is a ton of inconsistency when it comes to replays and when it comes to flagrants. There was also a bit of the skew in the free throws, which is kind of surprising that it led towards the Clippers. Usually the team that attempts more free throws wins the game, and Phoenix is also just a pretty good free throw drawing team. Not saying that this was, rigged or anything, but this was just some pretty inconsistent and pretty bad officiating. I think this is something that Suns and Clippers fans could come together with. So yeah, the Phoenix Suns are in the finals, the Clippers without Kawhi Leonard are a pretty good team, and the NBA kinda sucks when it comes to officiating and when it comes to injuries. Alright guys, I'll catch you later.